Hi, welcome to How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. In this podcast, we dive into compassionate leadership in today's fast-paced business environment. With our experience and insights, we'll help you lead with heart while securing your career. Join us for engaging conversations and practical advice to elevate your leadership skills and make a real difference. I'm your host, Roberto Torres, a seasoned startup engineering leader, alongside Chris Otterkin, a Fortune 100 IT leader. Today, we're discussing with all the tech layoffs turmoil how a human leader at these companies may need to talk to their teams. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hey, Roberto, I'm doing great. How's things going there in Mexico today?
Ah, very rainy days, but very cool. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, so layoffs are really starting to make the news again in significant volume, and it can be tough for a leader to be humane about it. You know, what is a terrible event in the employees' lives? It's going to be tough.
Well, actually, this has been going since September 2021. So it is a roller coaster in which you can see maybe there is a 10,000 layoffs worldwide, and suddenly you go to the peak of 100,000, and then you go 50,000. But it is something that we we as members of IT, regardless of the company or the country or everything, we have been observing because we could go like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think IT, it seems to me, and from my perspective of reading business news, IT has a tendency to feel the impact of layoffs more frequently than other areas of the business. Again, maybe a little bit biased because I'm in IT, but it certainly seems like that's one of the areas that gets hurt first because you can virtualize things, or you can send the labor to a different country, or other methods. So it does seem that IT gets impacted first. Then, one of the things I wanted to touch on is, as a humane leader, if you're facing layoffs and your employees are coming to you about it, one of the things that I always tried to do is explain to them ahead of time what actually happens in a layoff, so that when or if they are called into the room to be told they're being laid off, they don't they aren't totally surprised at how the conversation goes. At least in very large companies like I'm in, it's a very scripted event. HR and the legal team, they want to make sure that you as the leader don't say something in the layoff meeting that might make them, liable to be sued or anything. So in our company, we actually had very approved scripts. You could write it up, you'd have to give it to HR, and potentially even legal, depending on what the situation was, review the script and say, okay, yes, you can read that. And it was very basic. I mean, maybe a minute or two at a time, but it was basically something like, as you know, Chris, we're changing our company strategy, and we're doing some different things than we were before. To implement this strategy, we're going to have a reduction in force, and unfortunately, this impacts you. You will receive the company severance. If you have any questions, go to HR. Now, granted, it was a little bit longer than that, but literally only maybe a minute or two longer. It didn't explain much. It just said you'd get the severance package, and then they turn you over to HR, and the conversation with your boss is over. The boss is not allowed to say, great work, Chris. We've really appreciated your 40 years of contributions to the company. You've done outstanding work. We're going to miss you. We're so sorry we have to lay you off. They can't say any of that. And I would always try and brief my teams to let them know, look, I care about you. I always try to congratulate you when you do have successes, so that I appreciate your hard work. But if it comes into a layoff meeting, I can't say any of those things in the layoff meeting. I can't say I'm sorry. I can't say I wish it wasn't you. Nothing. I just have to read the script and say, unfortunately, this is going to impact your role, and HR will have all the details of the severance.
Yeah, and I think with everything that you mentioned, yes, communication is essential. As we've been talking in all the most of the episodes that we had in this podcast. And what I see when a layoff is involved or could be involved, there are two beings that are involved in this. The first is the human being that, in this case, it is the leader that will tell their team what they might be expecting. Okay, the company might be in turmoil. There could be layoffs. We don't know, but you try not to scare them. Try
Correct.
to be communicate with them so they can be aware. So there will be no illusions, and the expectations might happen, but to lead them to become productive. That is the first one. The second one, you could consider a company as a living being, but it's not. And I mention this because there are several books that says that companies have to be considered as a living being, that to thrive, was born to die and everything. But a company, it's a being which is cold at heart, which will tell you the stuff being really straightforward without, I don't know, some noise, will tell you everything. So when the company decides that maybe one person, one team, one department, or maybe a big percentage of the company has to be laid off, it will say it. So it has to be by the leader to apply a candor to tell the people everything, not everything, uh, what the leader can say, no more, because otherwise he or she will get in problems.
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, if you had said the wrong things in a layoff meeting, you may find yourself getting fired if you're violating company policy and procedures for, what you're supposed to do. And that's troubling, right? Because you want to be a humane leader. I think most people want to be a humane leader. Uh, I experienced in my life working with some peers who were perhaps a little bit less than humane or less than understanding of other people's perspectives on layoffs. I was shocked sometimes, with some leaders, how callously they just, it's just a layoff, one, because their ego thought it would never, ever be them. And some of them did end up getting laid off. Two, they're like, it's just normal business. They should just know. Your employees should just know that they could get laid off. And I always personally felt much more humane about it because, I had a mortgage, I had bills to pay. I liked the people I worked with. I didn't want to see them go, and I didn't want to leave myself. And so, as a humane leader, sometimes the things that kind of cold company, like you're saying, the cold company is just making hard, cold business decisions. Us as the humane leader can still try to be humane about it, educating our employees, be compassionate about what they're facing. If you know your employees, you know that the younger ones, maybe one of your younger colleagues in your team just had twins, in the family. So, boy, laying that person off is going to be rough, but the business doesn't care that they had twins. The business doesn't care that your adult parents now need nursing home care and you're spending extra money to take care of them. They don't care. They don't care. But you as the leader, you can be compassionate, and if the company's facing layoffs or they have questions, they come to you. I have new twins, or I have this difficulty with my parents. Do you think there's a risk of layoffs? My answer would be as well, look at the news, number one, and see that there are lots of layoffs. And two, how is our business doing? If the last quarter, if you're a publicly traded company, right, they have quarterly meetings. They usually have a quarterly meeting to report the earnings and the profits. Listen in on that. I can remember in my company, they actually would say in the earnings call that, we didn't meet our targets, and so we're probably going to have a reduction in force. Then how come the employees are surprised we're having a reduction in force? It was in this public call to stockholders. And it's because very few employees pay detailed attention to how the company is actually doing.
Yeah.
And as a humane leader, you can pass that information along. It's public information. Here it is. This is what they said. It may not make them feel any safer, but at least they're aware of the facts. And as a leader, you should always share facts. But, if they come to you, are there going to be layoffs? Is the fact that I don't know, but here's what they said in the earnings call. So we can then try and, suppose what that might mean. In my company, they had layoffs constantly. So it was, any employee there who thought they would never, ever be laid off. I don't know how they could think that, because there were layoffs almost every single year, sometimes 2 a year. So sometimes some employers are just not aware, and as the humane leader, you help inform them and point them to public information about what's going on to help them make career decisions, plan for the future. Maybe the company's not right for them either. If they face this kind of risk and can't manage the stress, maybe they should work someplace else.
Yeah, I'm going to split into what you just said. The first is of the employee, regardless of the position that they are. Okay, they must listen and pay attention and understand everything regarding the company. Is it in good track? Is it in bad track? It is in bad track. Okay, how it's going to affect me, my team, my department, everything. What can I do? What can I do? What are my boundaries to maybe helping the company so we cannot be laid off? But people, as we mentioned in the previous episode, people sometimes they're most in a big meeting, they're doing something else, playing with your mobile phone or not paying attention. So it is a total responsibility of the people to fully understand what is going on. It's like playing a constant chess game in which you could see if you're winning or not. If
Yes.
you don't pay attention, you will lose that match. Okay, that is the first one. And the second one, it is what you mentioned about the ego of the leader's ego. People don't realize that every day we're a day older. The young people we get old at some time. So if you do age discrimination, dude, it's going to happen to you in the future. So try to avoid that. So if you take away the ego, with one of the problems with the ego is that sometimes for many people, ego is a higher burden or than maybe your compassionate or your leadership, and ego sometimes dominates and dictates how you have to behave. But that's a topic for another episode. The thing is, if you take away the ego and be humane, you could contact and you do have a strength. Either you haven't formed a bond, you could have it, and if you have, you could communicate easier with your team. So I think these two challenges had to come from within us. Otherwise, it will be total demise.
Yes, no, I completely agree. It's also something you can't just suddenly turn on. If you've been leading the team for 3 years and the company's been doing great, but you really haven't been a very humane leader during that time, and now all of a sudden you're facing layoffs and you want to flip the switch and become humane and have deeper conversations with people to prepare them for what might come, it's probably too late. It takes time for you to have those kinds of conversations. Certainly on the second day of being the leader of the team, I want to talk about layoffs today. That's not something you can do, right? You've got to be building the rapport, building trust over time, being that humane leader, getting to know the team, getting to understand where they're at in their career, what motivates them, what fears do they have. I remember one gentleman, he had this great fear of getting laid off, but he had that fear for like 20 years.
Oh
Same
my God.
company. I'm going to get laid off. It's been 20 years. You still haven't been laid off. I mean, it's just one of those things but see, that for him, that was his biggest fear. Now, it was very easy to recognize because he would tell everybody who would listen to him, right? But you knew that if the company was facing layoffs, you're going to need, as a humane leader, to invest a little extra time with that person to make sure he stayed on task, stayed focused on delivering. Otherwise, he would get laid off, right? So you got to know your team so that you can be prepared in bad times, to be a more humane leader, so that you can manage a bad situation as best you can. Because I personally, I don't know how to do a good layoff, to be honest. There's no such thing as a good layoff in my book.
Yeah, there are certain things. The first is this gentleman that you mentioned, living in fear is something that I want to avoid, you know, because it eats you alive in your brain, in your body, in your mind. That's something that you cannot do. Fear exists, so we should acknowledge all the dangers around us, and fear exists so we could overcome it. Otherwise, it will dictate our life. So I don't know what happened with this guy, but you must really overcome fear. One thing that I think it's essential, and it's part of my philosophy, it is, and I think that any person that wants to become a human leader is I what I do is I act with people in the same way I trust they will act with me. So I do candor with people because I trust that they will do the same with me. And if you think thoroughly with this, you can see that people that behave bad and wrong with people, they're going. They might not expect that the other people will, that this third person or third parties will act the same, but they will do. So try to behave not good with people, so everything will go okay. Don't you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of one of those. It's karma, right? I mean, what
Yeah.
goes around comes around, and I certainly was able to observe that, in my company, where it didn't always, the layoffs or firings didn't always impact the people that they should have, but eventually they usually did. I don't know. I actually got laid off also. The root cause was more around a geolocation thing, so I don't know that I quote unquote deserved it. I'd like to think that I was a humane leader and didn't deserve it. But I was laid off even, and I think, having been on the other side of the table, because many times I was dictated that I would be laying people off, you must do it. Um, I was glad that I knew what the situation was going to be, and I could receive the information humanely as a humane employee, and being laid off. And I always wanted to treat people how I wanted to be treated. My boss followed the script, when I got laid off. I knew that's what the script would be. I'd had to write them several times, many times myself. So, I think when you're prepared for the layoff, even though it may not happen to you, not like the paranoid gentleman I mentioned, but be um, be aware that it could happen to you. Be aware of what the benefits are. Have you looked in your HR? In a big company, there's HR documents, right? HR portal maybe on the website. Find out what your benefits are. As a leader, have you shared with the team? Did they look at the benefits? I know many people in my company, many people that I knew didn't even know what the layoff benefit was. which was shocking to me. I'm like, I know what all my benefits are. I know what my dental and medical and my severance and all those things. So, maybe you can be a humane leader if you have one of those employees that's very worried about it. Well, here's the benefit. Here's where it is in the HR portal. Explain to them what the benefit would be if that person was to be laid off. These are the things that the company will do for you, whether it's so many weeks of pay, maybe it's career coaching to get your resume back up to date for applying for new jobs. Being a humane leader sometimes is just showing your employees some of the benefits they have in the company, even if it's benefits for something bad, like disability insurance or severance in a layoff situation. Because I'll tell you, the news with all these big companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, just huge companies laying off. I think a lot of people are probably going to be facing this layoff risk in the near future if they haven't faced it already, in the last few months.
Yeah, yeah. And as you, I was laid off as well. In this case, I was a head of engineering, and I was in charge of not creating this engineering team, but put on to have a foundation of success, and that's what I did. And I hired different leads, and I was working as a humane leader and becoming an advocate of soft skills, which a new head of people arrived and began doing that. So I was laid off because of duplicity of functions. So they said to me, "Okay, Roberto, this is your server package. It was good. It was according to law, and I felt like that. I felt, oh my God, what am I going to do? But I overcome fear, and I did what I do right now. And one thing that is important is how you mention to the people that you're going to be laid off. And if you do it with your heart, with candor, it's going to be really well. People won't say that, oh my God, I got laid off. Oh yes. Oh. No, no. They're not going to feel that way. But what they're going to feel, it is some maybe some persons they will say, okay, my leader was instead of a heartless person, he tried to communicate with candor and he tried to acknowledge the problems and maybe and that's why I remember well last year when I'm looking right now when Meta layoff back in November 9, 2022, lay off 11,000 people. Mike Zuckerberg, no, Zuckerberg, I don't know, I remember his name. Uh, his first name, he went directly to the camera, and all the 11,000 people were in a meeting in which Zuckerberg said, okay, I did wrong. I did this, it didn't work out. I'm sorry, you're going to be part of this severance package according to your country, to your team, I don't know. Thank you for all your hard work. I trust that you will get another work. I don't know. I don't know which were the exact words, but he tried to show his the acknowledgement of his problems, not of his problems, of his decisions. Know that it impacted all these people. But I could tell you, and I will, of many companies in which they didn't know that they were laid off until that traditions didn't work, until they received an email, not at morning, maybe at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, saying, oh, sorry, Chris, sorry, Roberto, you were laid off. That cold-hearted message throws many bad things about the leaders and the companies. Just recently, yesterday, I read of this lady who was the global logistics head of a payment gateway provider who was laid off 1 week, no, 1 month before giving birth to her baby with no package and everything. I was shocked. Those kind of companies are the ones that I don't want to work with, not the leaders. So I think that's a really bad situation.
Yeah. And nowadays, the big difference too, let's say to layoffs 30 years ago, is that now future job candidates can find out about the layoffs. 30 years ago, it would be really hard to find out if company X, Y, or Z does a lot of layoffs. I'll mention, I don't get compensated for this, but I know of a website called thelayoffs.com. So THE layoff.com. I think, or is there an S on the end? I'm not sure, but you can look up companies that you might be considering applying for, and you can read about, are they doing layoffs? How is the management? How compassionate are they? Are they humane leaders at that company? And so nowadays the youth or future employees, they can look, and if you are an inhumane company with a lot of inhumane leaders, you're probably going to have a recruiting problem. That information gets around now. Whereas previously, if you laid off a bunch of people, odds are future candidates coming out of college or whatever, they're not going to know. They would never know that it happened. They never knew that you threw out a bunch of people that were over 50 because you just wanted to get some cheap labor. Well, you're right. You mentioned before, like the younger generation. Well, that's okay. Yeah, but you'll be 50 sometime in the future also if you're lucky. And you don't want the axe swinging on your neck just because you're now 50 years old. So I think, as a humane leader, it helps the company in the long run, the more humane you are, because people want compassionate leadership, like you're mentioning. The Zuckerberg example of acknowledging, look, the reason we're having these layoffs are because mistakes that I made. And unfortunately, this is action we need to keep the company going. Wow, that's compassionate leadership. It's very rare.
I didn't know of that web page, but after ending this podcast, I'll jump into that. So because right now I'm applying to jobs. Well, it's really difficult. Okay, with this, I think that we could do the wrap up. Don't you agree, Chris?
Yes, sir.
Okay, before that, I remember that I mentioned it was Mike Zuckerberg, but I think it's Mark Zuckerberg. So
yeah, Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg.
Okay, so well, thanks for joining us on another episode of How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. We hope our insights help you become a smarter and more strategic leader. Apply today's lessons to see the positive impact in your team and career. Catch all our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and YouTube. Join us next week as we discuss something trendy in the leadership world. Until then, stay humane and stay successful. Bye-bye, Chris.
Goodbye, Roberto.